On this episode of Crime Scenes with Coffee Beans, True Aussie Murders Caffeinated, join me as I take a deep dive into the Nightcaller, a man whose criminal history was so extensive, but it wasn't exposed until he went on a shooting spree. You got to listen to it to believe it, and that's coming up right after this. Hi everyone and welcome. Welcome to Crime Scenes with Coffee Beans, True Aussie Murders Caffeinated. I'm your host, Belinda Brady, and welcome guys, episode 17. This episode is titled The Nightcaller, Eric Edgar Cooke. Now, first up, what I am drinking for this podcast. This podcast, I'm drinking Nescafe Caramel Choc Mocha, and I'm not liking it. And if you heard something bang, little crash in the background, that was me haphazardly chucking the packet on the table next to me because I'm not really enjoying it. It's not sweet enough. Not for me. So if anyone out there in Nescafe land is listening, make these sweeter, guys. You're drinking a biscuit, a coffee that is inspired by our national icon, Tim Tam. Tim Tam's a chocolate biscuit. We want it sweet. That's just my 2 cents worth. And today's episode, my sources are abc.net.au and theheraldsun.com.au and Expedia.com, as always. And I just want to, before I get stuck into the episode, I just want to say hello to a few people. I've looked on my stats this week and I've seen I've got some people from some fabulous places all over and some I haven't heard of before. So I've got a few from Jacksonville in North Carolina. I've got Allen, Texas, and I've got Salt Lake City, Utah, which of course I've heard of you guys. I mean, Real Housewives of Salt Lake City. I love that. Virginia Beach, Virginia, Preston, Lancashire, and I hope I've said that right, Lebanon, Ohio, and Springfield, Virginia. And of course, I've got Sydney, New South Wales, Brisbane, Melbourne, and a few in Tassie in Australia. So thanks, guys. I love seeing where you're from. And if you'd love a shout out, please let me know. Let me know your name and let me know where you are from so I make sure I've got the right person. Okay, now settle in for this one, guys, because this one's a doozy. And I know I say this with pretty much every episode, but this one is. And this killer's crimes really didn't come to light until he was caught. And two innocent men were jailed for these murders. And he wasn't even in the ballpark of being a suspect, and it was only until he was caught it was only after he was caught after shooting dead people for no reason that he confessed to these crimes. So get yourself settled, get whatever you are drinking, get comfy, lend me your ears. Now this does talk about murder, and it does talk about people being murdered in horrible ways. So if this is not your thing, that is okay. I'm not your girl. This is not your podcast. But if it is, get yourself settled right in. Let's get ready to go. And I will say real quickly, if you do hear something in the background, my 2 executive producers, also known as my little dash hounds, are here in the studio / spooky room with me. So they are just making sure everything's okay. All right, guys, settle in as we get into episode 17 of Crime Scenes with Coffee Beans, The Nightcaller, Eric Edgar Cooke. Now, serial killers are disturbing people. That goes without saying. But some are so disturbing, you just need to take a breath and step back from the atrocities they committed, but only for a minute. And then you have to look at what they've done and the person they are. And this is the case with the man who was known as the Nightcaller, Eric Edgar Cooke. Now, I'd not heard of this guy. I'd not heard of this serial killer until it was suggested to me by a listener. And thank you, by the way. And once I started investigating him and his crimes, I had to take a few breaks just to gather my thoughts. I mean, Eric was all over the place. He was killing at random, killing when the opportunity arose. He had no real, I guess, victim. You know, he never went for a blonde or a brunette or a woman. He killed at random, and the police did say that he was an opportunistic killer. And it just appears that he did kill people for the hell of it. Now, this man with the cleft palate who shot, strangled, stabbed and ran over his victims and terrorised the Western Australian city of Perth from 1958 to 1963, and that is a long 5 scary years for the residents of Perth and its surrounding suburbs. The man who let 2 innocent men be jailed for his crimes, and when he was finally caught and confessed to at least 20 violent crimes and the murder of 8 innocent people, it was hard to work out where his story began and how he got to where he was. I mean, obviously there's a beginning and an end, but Eric's beginning was so awful. I don't think he stood a chance to even have any kind of normality of any kind of defining moment where he's gone, righto, this is where I'm normal and now this is where I'm spilling into being a serial killer. I think he was one of those guys that was just born evil. And as I explain his life, you might agree with me, you might not, and that's okay. So his background and his upbringing was so hard and so damaging to the young Eric. It's important to talk about it, even if only to give some kind of context. And he was so random in selecting his victims. Like I've said previously, there's no real pattern to him. He truly was an enigma wrapped in a serial killer. So I'm going to start at the beginning, his awful upbringing, and finish where he ended. So strap yourself in, folks, get comfy, get a drink, and lend me your ears as we go back to a city gripped by fear, Perth, Western Australia, in Australia between 1958 and 1963. Eric Edgar Cooke was born on the 25th of February 1931 in Victorious Park, which is a suburb of Perth, Western Australia. His parents had migrated from Scotland, and he was the oldest of 3 children. So his parents was his mother Christine and his father Vivian. They had migrated over from Scotland, and the only reason they had gotten married was because Christine was pregnant with him. Now, he was the oldest of 3 children, and the family he was born into was violent and toxic and dysfunctional. Now, his dad, Vivian, was an alcoholic who would beat Eric regularly, especially when Eric jumped in to protect his mum from the same beatings. Now, it got so bad for his mother that she would sleep in the staff room at her job in the Como Hotel where she worked just to avoid going home. Now, to add to his already huge disadvantage, Eric was born with a cleft lip and palate, and he had a series of operations to correct this, once when he was a baby and then again when he was a toddler. But the operations weren't overly successful and left him with a facial deformity and a speech impediment, making him the target of relentless bullying at school. So this, along with his abusive home life, led him to being pretty emotionally unstable. Now, Eric was good with most subjects. Like, he was a cluey kid, but he was expelled from Subiago State School at the age of 6. Yes, 6 years old, for stealing money from a teacher's purse. Now, he transferred to Newcastle Street's infant school, but he was bullied again, and unfortunately the bullying would follow him no matter what school he went to. Now, due to his home life, Eric would be placed in foster care, for occasion, but nothing really stuck, and he always found himself back home. But just like his mother, Eric would take to roaming the streets or hiding underneath his house to avoid his violent father. Now, Eric was frequently hospitalized for injuries, for head injuries, and accident proneness, which caused suspected brain damage. From what I could gather, Eric was very accident prone and as a result would hurt himself often, resulting in, infrequent hospital trips. And you have to wonder, did the beatings he suffered at the hands of his dad have anything to do with this? And whether it did or not, his injuries were worrisome as they were varied, as he suffered from a range of injuries such as a broken nose, second degree burns, etc., etc. But despite all his misgivings and his just crap lot at life, he was always loyal to his mother, always loyal to his mother, and gave his weekly wages to her to help support the family, as her wages from her job as a cook and a cleaner could only stretch so far. It's also worth mentioning that Eric used to label his lunch bag with the name Al Capone, who we all know, of course, as that, New York gangster, whenever he started a new job. Now, Eric quickly spiraled into a life of crime, and at the age of 17, that's when things kicked off in the crime world for him, along with his likeness for violence. Now, when he was 17, he was jailed for 18 months for burning down a church after he was rejected for the church choir. He would also sneak into houses and steal whatever he could get his hands on, and he eventually progressed to damaging furniture and clothing in acts of revenge. He would then cut out newspaper articles of his crimes and brag about them to people he worked with in an attempt to gain friends. And eventually the law caught up with him in 1949 when his fingerprints were matched to those left at a crime scene, and he was arrested at his grandmother's house where he was living at the time. He was sentenced to 3 years in prison for several acts of stealing and breaking and entering. Now, he got out, and when he was 21, believe it or not, Eric joined the Australian Army, but was quickly dismissed when his juvenile record was discovered, but not before he was promoted to Lance Corporal and not before he was taught how to handle firearms. He then went on to marry a girl by the name of Sally Lavin, a 19-year-old waitress, when he was 22. The couple quickly went on to have a large family, 7 kids all up, which consisted of 4 sons and 3 daughters. But marriage and fatherhood wasn't enough for Eric to, stick to the straight and narrow and not go back to the world of crime, because soon enough he was sneaking around stealing cars, and at times he was returning the cars he had stolen to the home he had stolen them from before the owner of the car had even noticed it was gone. But that came to an end after he crashed a car he stole in 1955 and needed to go to hospital for treatment, which resulted in him being charged and jailed for grand theft auto. And he was released from jail just before Christmas in 1956. Now, rather than learn from his mistake and think maybe I should stop doing bad stuff, No. Eric just decided he was going to start wearing gloves instead. So when he went on the hunt to steal cars, he always had gloves on so he wouldn't leave his fingerprints behind. Now, Eric was the reason thousands of people started locking their cars at night all of a sudden. And back then, people didn't. People didn't even lock their houses, but because of creeps like Eric creeping around, stealing your car and breaking into your house, people started locking their cars and houses all of a sudden. And for a really long time, that's all the locals and police thought they were dealing with, was a brazen thief. But soon he would commit a crime so heinous, so violent, so public, he would be thrown into the spotlight, and the crimes that we didn't know about would be exposed. Now, remember this date. Eric roamed the streets of Perth that morning with a gun he had stolen from a South Perth home the night before. And at around 2:40 a.m. in the beachside suburb of Cottesloe, a couple saw a middle-aged man lurking near their parked car, which was parked near the beach at the time. Now, the man yelled at them to clear off and threw a beer bottle at them. Now, the woman stated she then saw the man raise a .22 rifle and take aim at her and her partner from around 12 metres away from them. Now, the woman quickly pushed her partner out of the way, but as she did this, the bullet went through her hand and through the neck of her partner. They both managed to get themselves to Fremantle Hospital and raise the alarm for help. Undeterred by this, the man made his way to the flat of a 29-year-old accountant by the name of Brian Weir, who was asleep with his head facing the veranda. So the veranda door was open, so Brian could get some kind of breeze on a stifling hot summer's night, because this took place in January, and January is peak summer here in Australia. So Brian was asleep with his head towards an open veranda door, just hoping to catch some kind of summer breeze. And Eric, seizing the opportunity, took aim and shot him right through that open door. Brian was rushed to hospital and brain surgeons worked on him for 6 hours, and though they managed to save his life, Brian was left permanently disabled. Now, the fellow in question moved on to his next victim, retired grocer George Walmsley, 55, who was shot in the head when he answered the door to a locked and loaded man ready to go. He knocked on the family's door at around 3 a.m. and George's wife and daughter found their husband and father unconscious with a bullet wound in his forehead by the front door. And if you thought that was it, no, not even close. Next up was 19-year-old John Sturkey, an agricultural science student who was shot as he slept on the veranda of a boarding house. A fellow lodger by the name of Pauline Fenton called police after she awoke to John moaning in pain, and she initially thought he was just having a bad dream until she went out and saw, to her horror, that he had actually been shot. The city was in fear and police advised residents to lock their doors as they looked for the gunman, but he had stalked himself off into the shadows and was not found. But a few weeks later, social worker Constance Madrill was found strangled to death with a cord from a bedside lamp. It is also reported that her killer raped her corpse, disrobed her and dragged her to a neighbour's lawn, where he then sexually penetrated her with a whiskey bottle. He then left the bottle in her arms for her to be discovered. On the 18th of August, he struck again when he shot dead 18-year-old student Shirley McLeod while she was babysitting. The killer reportedly grabbed a lemonade from the fridge of one of his victims and drank it on their veranda before fleeing. That's how brazen he was. Now, while Perth was gripped by absolute terror of this psychotic, sadistic serial killer roaming, police were scrambling to find him, and they were busy taking fingerprints of more than 30,000 males over the age of 12, as well as finding and testing more than 60,000 .22 rifles. But soon enough, their luck would change, and an elderly couple out for a walk in Mount Pleasant happened to come across a .22 rifle that had been stashed away, kind of out of sight, but enough sight for them to see it. Now, they notified police, who came to collect the rifle, and the rifle was tested, and ballistics came back as a match for the rifle that had been used to kill Shirley McLeod, the young girl that had been killed while she was babysitting. Police figured that the killer would be coming back for his rifle, so they thought, okay, we'll trick him here. So what they did was they left a dummy rifle in the exact same spot where the rifle that had been used to kill Shirley McLeod was found, and they caught him. They caught the killer when he came back to collect what he thought was his rifle. And if you guessed that killer was Eric Edgar Cooke, you guessed correctly. It was Eric. The man who had terrorized Perth for months, if not years. The man with the wavy hair and twisted mouth was arrested when he came back to retrieve his precious gun. And he was quickly charged with Shirley MacLeod's murder. But after initially denying any involvement at all, he wouldn't talk. And it was only after a fed-up detective said to him, quote, "Cookie, you're gonna hang. You know, there's no doubt about it. You got a wife and kids. Think of them. And think about whether you're going to be dragged to the gallows like a mongrel dog or you're going to go there like a man." Now, this must have stirred something, some kind of shred of decency left in Eric, because he not only confessed to Shirley's murder, but other murders that police didn't even know about, and other murders that other innocent men had been sent to jail for. And once Eric started confessing, he couldn't stop. It was like someone had turned a tap on. He confessed to 8 murders, including the massacre on Australia Day, and 14 attempted murders, and more than 250 burglaries. He was charged with the murder of John Starkey, and he also confessed to the stabbing murder of Penina Berkman, and I do hope I have pronounced that correctly. He confessed to the stabbing murder of beautician Penina Berkman in 1959. He then confessed to the murder of heiress to the Robertson chocolate empire, Gillian Brewer, with a hatchet and scissors in 1961 in her Cottesloe apartment, and letting a deaf mute by the name of Daryl Beamish take the rap. Now, Daryl was initially sentenced to death over this murder he didn't commit, but the sentence was commuted to imprisonment, and an investigation and appeal, which was supported by Post newspaper's owner Brett Christian, was dismissed as the prosecution believed that Eric was full of it and only trying to delay his trial. The second murder he hadn't been tied to initially, he confessed to, was that of Rosemary Anderson, who died in Royal Perth Hospital at around 2:30 a.m. on Friday the 10th of February 1963. Now, Rosemary had spent the previous evening with her boyfriend, a man by the name of John Button, celebrating his 19th birthday, but after they had an argument, Rosemary got mad and decided to walk home. Now, John followed her in his car, trying to get her to come back with him, but she kept walking off. And at one point, he parked his car a further bit up from where she was walking, thinking, you know, she'll eventually meet me and I'll get her in the car and I'll get her home safely. And he had a cigarette while he was waiting for her to walk up, but she didn't. So he jumped in his car, drove around looking for her, and found her on the road at Shenton Park suffering serious injuries. She had obviously been hit by a car. He rushed to the hospital, where unfortunately she passed away. She died of her injuries. Now, distressed at the news of her death, for whatever reason, John confessed to running her down, even though he didn't do it. And he was convicted of her manslaughter. And even though Eric has now since confessed at the time of his arrest to running her down, courts dismissed John's appeal. And over the decades that followed, John and his supporters continued to campaign for a retrial. And the theory that Eric had provided, that he actually had hit Shirley with his car that hard that she had been thrown over the roof, was proven. You know, they finally went through, they found records around that time where Eric had put a car in to get fixed not long after her death with a damaged roof. Now, this only backed up his story that yes, he had hit her that hard that she had come down on his roof. So this was not the first woman Eric had run down with his car, and several were left permanently disabled as a result of just being in the wrong place at the wrong time. And despite Eric's confession, both men still served time even after he confessed. Beamish served 15 years while Button ended up serving 5, with both men eventually being acquitted of these crimes. Now, Button's conviction was squashed in 2002 and he was awarded $460,000 from the Western Australian government. And in 2011, Beamish was awarded $425,000 from the Western Australian government for wrongful imprisonment. Meanwhile, back in November 1963, Eric stood trial for murder before Justice Virtue and a jury, where he pleaded not guilty on the grounds of insanity. His defence tried to claim that he had schizophrenia, but this was dismissed after the director of the State Mental Health Services testified that he was sane, and the judge agreed, stating, quote, "This boy has a chronic, long-standing resentment against society." And after 3 days, he was found guilty, with the jury finding him guilty in the record time of 1 hour and 5 minutes. And on November 27th, 1963, Eric Edgar Cooke was sentenced to death by hanging. He ordered his lawyers not to appeal, as he deserved to pay for what he had done. And at 8 a.m. on the 26th of October 1964, 11 months after being sentenced, Eric was hanged. But just before he was hanged, he swore on a Bible that he did kill Gillian Brewer and Rosemary Anderson. Eric Edgar Cooke was the last man to be hanged in Perth, Western Australia, and was buried in Fremantle Cemetery, above the remains of child killer Martha Randall, who in 1909 was the last woman to hang in Fremantle Prison. Eric's long-suffering wife Sally and their 7 kids had had enough of being harassed about their husband and father, and by the time he was hung, Sally had had enough, and she left a note, a handwritten note on the family's front door, asking simply for the family to be left alone. Eric Edgar Cooke destroyed so many lives in his reign of terror, so many. He killed so many, he hurt so many, he permanently disabled and disfigured and just destroyed so many lives. And why? Why did he do that? He never gave a reason that I could find. I could never find a reason that he gave for doing what he did. And is it a case of nature or nurture? Is it a case of he was just born evil, or was it a case of he was born into such a toxic fight or flight environment he had no choice but to become what he was exposed to in order to survive? He had to be the bigger dog. Who knows? Only he knows. And he's dead and he can't tell us. I think he was just pure evil. I think he was just one of those people that were born pure evil. And there we have it, guys. The story of the night caller, Eric Edgar Cooke, the man who, for reasons only known to him, killed people, hurt people, disabled people for whatever reason. None of us will ever know, and only he knows, and he took that reason with him to the grave. I hope you've enjoyed this episode. I do thank you for your company, and if you are enjoying my podcast, please, I would love it if you could get the word out for me. Tell your friends, tell your co-workers, tell your gym buddies, tell your garbage man, tell everybody far and wide. Get on, have a listen, and let me know what you think. I love some feedback, guys. All feedback is good feedback. I am on TikTok, I'm on YouTube, I'm on Spotify, I am on Apple Podcasts, and I'm on other places where you get your podcasts. So I would love it if you could hit me with a review or a rating or a follow. And I also have a subscribe option available. And at the moment, I am offering a personalized shout out if you subscribe. I am thinking of doing some bonus episodes down the track for my subscribers. I just need to work out how to do that because I'm still a bit of a novice at all this. But that is something I'm looking at if that is something you would like to hear. And that's it, guys. Crime Scenes with Coffee Beans, True Aussie Murders, caffeinated, done and dusted. We are wrapped up. Thank you for listening. You are all absolute rock stars. And until next time, guys, stay safe, stay cool, and stay caffeinated. I will catch you all later.